Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, and welcome to the Africa Weekly Talk. Today's subject on the docket is about Vice President Kamala Harris' visit to three African countries that has also created a lot of controversy with regards to the LGBTQ issues going on in these three African countries: Ghana, Tanzania, and Zambia. I don't know whether if it was just sheer coincidence that these three countries that she is visiting also happens to have legislation in their various parliaments with regards to these LGBTQ issues. But apparently, it is a big issue that the West and America are very, very concerned about. There was this American reporter by the name of Kano Youngs at a press conference with the Ghanaian president, Nana Akufo-Addo. Vice President Kamala Harris was asked about the LGBT bill pending in Ghana's parliament. And she made it emphatically clear about the American stance on that issue and the bill pending in Ghana's parliament. And the president of Ghana also made his stance, making the case that the bill is still in parliament and has to go through the parliamentarian process before it gets to his desk, and he will make his decision on that. But let me be clear on this issue. I'm 100% libertarian. I believe in people having the right to make decisions for themselves, especially when it comes to people's sexual orientation and all that stuff. I have no qualms with LGBT as well as gay or lesbian people. They have the right to be whatever they want to be, as far as that does not infringe on other people's rights. That's fine. That is their choice. If you want to be gay or you want to be lesbian, that's your choice. Stay in your house and you have your own relationship there, that's your choice. I don't believe in government intrusion in people's private lives. I made this argument and supported the Democratic Party back in the day during our Gore, Bill Clinton time when it came to these issues. That those issues are personal and has to stay personal. And I agree with that and I stand by that. But my problem with this LGBTQ issue in Africa right now has more to do with the US and the Western governments trying to impose their way of life on the African continent. First of all, in her response to the question by the American reporter, Kamala Harris made it clear that this was a human rights issue, which I beg to differ. This, to me, is not about human rights. This is about cultures. Because you're talking about the African culture, which is totally different from the Western and American culture. So if you try to define this as human rights, that's a slap in the face to the Africans. Because in the African culture, this issue is totally different compared to the Western culture. And I want to remind people who might not know the little history that goes back about this gay and lesbian issues as well as LGBT issues in America. Up until about 30 years ago, when Bill Clinton was then the president of the United States of America, this issue of LGBT as well as gays and lesbians was not considered a human rights issue. As a matter of fact, even the liberal Democrats at that time will not even put this issue on their platforms during their conventions in the late 80s and early 90s. It was a no-no. This was a no-no for even the liberal Democrats who will not put up this issue on their platform at any of their conventions in the late 80s all the way through the 90s. Now, Bill Clinton becomes president. At that time, in the US military, it was illegal to be a gay or a lesbian in the US armed forces. So in essence, if you were found to be a gay or lesbian person in the US armed forces at that time, you were dishonorably discharged from the US military. So this was an issue that even within the US government, it was illegal to be gay or lesbian at that time. So where did this issue of human rights come about? It started coming about recently to make the case for these LGBTQ issues. But the question is, why wasn't it about human rights when the United States government, in their own armed forces, when these people were serving in the military, going to wars, fighting on behalf of the US government, but it was considered illegal in the US government? I remember when Bill Clinton came to office in 1993, when the Defense Act that he put in place, which was called the Don't Ask, Don't Tell, thereby saying that no armed forces personnel have the right to ask a service member of their sexual orientation. And any service member in the armed forces of the United States of America also don't have to tell anybody about their sexual orientation. So it was coined Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy by the Clinton administration at that time. And the reason they did that was because they didn't want to get into the issue in terms of allowing gays and lesbians serving in the United States military. So to get away around it, they decided to come up with that policy, Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So if you don't tell anybody or you don't say anything or nobody asks you, then there's nothing to talk about. You can still serve as a lesbian or gay. That is how far the United States government at that time under Bill Clinton went with the LGBTQ issue at that time. The country evolved as time went by. Now you go to a lot of states in America, almost every state in America today have gay marriage, have same-sex marriage, have laws protecting gays and lesbians all over across the board in America today. So it has evolved to become what it is today. So I've just gave you guys a little history of where we are in America in terms of LGBTQ issues in America today. Now, in Africa, it is different. The Africans have a totally different culture. And Africans have not evolved to allow these things into their culture today. But what gets me most about these issues is that when you have Western countries and America trying to impose their cultures on the African continent, that is where this becomes an issue with me. First of all, this issue of LGBTQ in African parliaments today would never have been issued if not for the Western countries trying to push this agenda on the African continent. It would never have been an issue. They wouldn't have had all these bills that are pending in most African parliaments today against LGBTQ issues going on right now, if not for the Western countries pushing this agenda on the African continent. And now this thing has backfired on the West on this issue. So now you have the Vice President of America, Kamala Harris, going on a 3-country visit. And it is not sheer coincidence that all these 3 countries have pending legislation with regards to LGBTQ issues. You know, all these 3 have them. So why did she pick these 3 countries? Because knowing what and how America does things best, this was to get into the ears of the certain president of these 3 countries that, look, we are serious about these issues. We take these issues very seriously. And therefore, you have to do something about these issues in your country. That's what this trip is about. This trip is not about economic development or investments coming to Africa. This trip is about making these presidents and the legislature of these countries aware that we are watching what is going on in your various African countries. And this is where we stand on these issues. And you better come along with us on this issue, or we're going to do what we have to do to make sure that you're going to have some repercussions when these bills pass in your various African countries. That's what this is about. Now, and the funny thing about this is that her trip is going on right around the time that Uganda passed the most strict anti-LGBT legislation in Uganda. And basically criminalizing the LGBT behaviors and all that stuff in Uganda. And out of that, you had the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, who was on the news a couple of last week talking about how horrific that bill that was passed by the Ugandan parliament and calling on the Commonwealth countries to come together and do something about it. And then you also had a White House press secretary of the United States, as well as the State Department press secretary, commenting about repercussions that Uganda is going to face with the passing of that legislation in their parliament. So basically, you have these Western countries already threatening an African country for passing a law that they deemed about more of a value as well as cultural law. In essence, they're passing these laws to protect their culture and their values in their various African countries. And that is what it is. I mean, this issue of LGBTQ going on all over Africa has more to do with the African culture, because it has nothing to do with human rights abuses or anything. It has more to do with the African culture. And these African leaders and the legislatures, most of these African countries, deemed it necessary, based on the pressure coming from these Western countries, for them to do something to prevent the influx of LGBT and gay and lesbian activities going on all over the world, to infiltrate into the African culture. And that's what this is about. So these African legislators are putting in place a buffer to prevent these things from happening in their various African countries. And I can understand why they are doing this, and I have no qualms with the Africans doing this in their various African countries. Because at the end of the day, every society that you live in make laws to suit their culture. The Africans have to make laws to suit their culture, not to suit America's culture. All right? That is how societies live. You don't live in your society on somebody else's culture. LGBTQ issues are going on thriving well in American culture and Western culture today, because that is the culture that they live in and has been accepted in that culture. Just like I said earlier, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, the very liberals in American politics, I mean the Democrats, will not even talk about LGBT issues in America at that time. But today, go around all the United States, same-sex marriages, rights of various kinds of rights given to LGBTs and all that stuff, all over in America, because the country has evolved and is at the point where it's now accepted. And everybody in this country accepts it and moves on with it. But if you look at Africa, that's a totally different ballgame. If the African culture at some point decides to accept it, that's up to the Africans. But no country should impose their culture on another country if that country is not willing to accept that culture. Because at the end of the day, you have to look at this way also. These emerging democracies in Africa have to what? Represent their citizens. And if the African citizens don't believe in the LGBTQ issues that are going on in their various African countries today, it is up to their parliaments and their representatives to stand firm with them. Because at the end of the day, that is what democracies are all about. You choose your elected leaders and you choose your representatives to represent your interests. So these bills that are going on in Africa are basically bills that are being passed because to protect the interests of their constituents. That's what this is about. Now, you hear about this talking about human rights and all of that. I get all of that. Like I stated earlier, I'm a staunch libertarian. I stand with anybody who wants to be gay or lesbian, or that's their business. As far as it stays in their homes and does everything in their home, that's their business. I have no qualms or anything about that. But it becomes a problem when it is imposed on others within the society. That is where the issue is. My issue is not about to criminalize people's behavior in their bedrooms. I'm totally against that. But I also don't want government, especially government from outside other people's countries, to tell a sovereign country what their laws should be with regards to their cultures. After all, most African countries have polygamy. Almost every African country is polygamous, has a polygamy in their society. The Africans don't come to the Western countries and tell them that, oh, because we are coming here, we also want you to have polygamous societies. Same with Arab countries and Muslim countries. All of them have polygamous societies. But they don't come to the West and tell them that, you have to have polygamy in your country. They don't go to Germany to tell Germans that, you have to have polygamy. No, because we know that in Germany, polygamy is illegal. And to some extent, even in Germany, if they find out that you have a polygamous relationship, you can go to jail for up to 3 years in Germany with a huge fine attached to it. Same with the United States of America and all of Western Europe. But no African or no Arab or Muslim countries are telling these Western countries to have polygamous societies in their countries. That can also be termed as human rights. But we are not forcing that on the Western culture, because in the Western culture, you cannot have a polygamy relationship in the Western culture. And so when the Africans and the Arabs and the Muslim people move to Western cultures, they live by the Western laws. They don't go there arguing that we want our rights to be fulfilled here because we want to have a polygamous society in your countries. No, we don't do that. So by the same token, we as Africans also have to have the right to decide how our cultures in our societies have to be. It is not up to a Western country to come and tell us how to shape our cultures, because these are cultures that have existed within the African continent for over thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And it has to be preserved. That does not mean that you have to make it difficult or criminalize others who want to have a certain lifestyle when it comes to their sexual orientation, all that stuff. Like I stated earlier, I have no problem when somebody wants to be gay or lesbian. That's their business. That's their private business. The only issue I have with that issue is when they want to impose it on the society as a whole, like most Western countries want to do now. They want to impose that on you, that you have to accept that. Nobody has to accept anybody's way of life. But you have to respect their way of life. That is it. And unfortunately, that is what this visit that the Vice President Kamala Harris 3-day visits to these 3 African countries is all about. This is not about promoting human rights and all that stuff. Everybody believes in human rights. We believe in that. But if this was about human rights 35 years ago, what were the Americans saying? Did they say anything about human rights when the gays and lesbians were calling for same-sex marriage and arguing for their rights and all of that stuff? People were being expelled in the U.S. military. There are a lot of people that were expelled from the U.S. military because they were gay or lesbians 30, 40, 50 years ago in American armed forces. Nobody fought and argued about human rights at that time. Where are these same people going around fighting about, talking about human rights? Where were they those years? Like I stated, the Democrats who were in charge then, what did they do? They would not even bring that issue of gay and lesbian onto the convention floor during their 80s and 90s presidential conventions. The Democratic Party will not even, because the Republicans were trying to bait them to put that on their platforms, on their conventions. And they avoided all of that. So now America has evolved around it. The Western countries have evolved around it. And now it's accepted in their communities, their countries, and all that. That's all well and good. And it's very good for the LGBTQ people. But if the Africans are not ready for it, don't impose it on the Africans. 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, if the Africans also evolve and decide to accept that, The Africans will make that decision themselves. But don't come from your various Western cultures and trying to impose your way of life on the African culture. I'm sorry. You're not going to get anything out of that. You have created an environment where now LGBTQ legislations being pending in most of these African countries, criminalizing this behavior just because of what they are seeing as a threat coming from the Western culture. And that is what has created all this legislation that is pending. And now, talking about the threat that is coming from the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, talking about the repercussions against Uganda, as well as the press secretary for the State Department, also talking about the repercussions and all that stuff, economic repercussions and all that stuff. See, that is where this thing becomes very dicey. Now, you have a situation in Ghana where Ghana is asking the IMF for a bailout up to the tune of about $3.something billion. Zambia is also in the same situation. And I think Tanzania is also in the same situation. Do you think Vice President Kamala Harris' three-country visit is just sheer coincidence? No. They just put it into their ears. Now look, we take these issues very, very seriously. And this is where your situation is. And as far as you are in this situation, you got to listen to what we want you to do. So now it's up to the African leaders to look at themselves and ask themselves, are they going to succumb to thousands and thousands of years of culture and traditions in Africa? Or they are going to sell their souls and their traditions just to please the Western societies that they are also coming around? But at the end of the day, they also have to remember, this is about the people that they are governing. And if it's not up to the people to accept LGBTQ issues in their various countries, then they should just leave it alone and stand firm and not allow this into their various African countries. But if the people of Africa wants it, then it's the people that have spoken. So, to my fellow Africans, this issue is about culture and values. And I hope Africans will preserve their culture and values. If it's Sunday, it's the Africa Weekly Talk. God bless you guys, and peace and love.